In this training, we'll learn how infections are spread and cover standard precautions and practices to prevent the spread of infections in the workplace. Germs are a part of everyday life and are found in our air, soil, water, and even on and in our bodies. Some germs are helpful, others are harmful. Many germs live in and on our bodies without causing harm, and some even help us to stay healthy. Only a small portion of germs are known to cause infection. An infection occurs when germs enter the body, increase in number, and cause a reaction of the body. Three things are necessary for an infection to occur. First, a source. This is a place where infectious agents or germs can live, such as sinks, any surface, and even human skin. Second, a susceptible person with a way for germs to enter the body. And third, transmission, a way for germs to move to the susceptible person. In the next few moments, we'll cover some of the ways you can help prevent the spread of infections. These standard practices and precautions include proper hand hygiene, the use of personal protective equipment or PPE, respiratory hygiene and cough etiquette, proper handling of contaminated material, and proper handling and disposal of sharps. Washing your hands is easy, and it's one of the most effective ways to prevent the spread of germs. Clean hands can stop germs from spreading from one person to another and throughout an entire community, from your home and workplace to childcare facilities and hospitals. Follow these 5 steps every time. Wet your hands with clean, running water, warm or cold. Turn off the tap and apply soap. Lather your hands by rubbing them together with the soap. Lather the backs of your hands, between your fingers, and under your nails. Then scrub your hands for at least 20 seconds. If you need a timer, hum the Happy Birthday song from the beginning to end twice. Then rinse your hands well under clean running water. Dry your hands with a clean towel or air dry them. Washing your hands with soap and water is the best way to get rid of germs in most situations. You can use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer that contains at least 60% alcohol if soap and water are not available. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, provides a barrier between you and the infectious material, preventing contact that could place you at risk of infection. The most common equipment are gloves, but can also include things like masks, goggles, face shields, and aprons. It's important to always use appropriate equipment if you expect contact with infectious material. If you do not have appropriate materials available to you, you should request them from your supervisor before exposing yourself to the material. You should dispose of used protective equipment properly and label it as biohazard to prevent others from coming into contact with it. Respiratory secretions, like saliva and mucus, can carry infections like the common cold, influenza, the strep virus, and even tuberculosis. A cough can travel as fast as 50 miles per hour and expel almost 3,000 droplets of respiratory secretions. A sneeze can travel up to 100 miles per hour and can create upwards of 100,000 droplets of respiratory secretions. The following measures to contain respiratory secretions are recommended for all individuals at all times, since we never know when we might have an infection. Cover your mouth and nose with a tissue when coughing or sneezing. If a tissue isn't available, You can sneeze or cough in the crook of your elbow. Use the nearest waste receptacle to dispose of the tissue after use. Perform hand hygiene, such as hand washing or using alcohol-based hand sanitizer or antiseptic wash after having contact with respiratory secretions and contaminated objects and materials. Be sure to encourage proper respiratory hygiene in the workplace. Materials that have become contaminated with the bacteria, virus, or organism that can cause disease or infection can pose a health risk to any susceptible person. Knowing how to handle contaminated material can reduce the risk of disease transmission. You should always avoid direct skin contact with any contaminated material and use personal protective equipment, such as gloves, when handling material is necessary. If the material cannot be disposed of, clean it with an approved disinfectant labeled for such use. When finished, wash your hands with soap and water. For most of us, handling needles isn't a part of our typical day-to-day responsibilities. Still, it's important to know how to deal with a needle if we find one. First, don't attempt to handle an unsheathed needle or to recap it. Instead, use a pair of tongs or tweezers or even pliers to carefully pick up the needle with the needle end pointing down and place it in an approved sharps container. If one is not available at your site, you can use a heavy-duty plastic container instead. Wash your hands with soap and water and notify your supervisor or site manager immediately. This training follows the U.S. Center for Disease Control guidelines for infection control. For more information, you can visit the CDC website. If you have questions about this training, please ask your supervisor.